January 1767. The air in the cramped cabin of the French naval vessel is thick with the competing smells of tar, brine, and drying flora. Outside, the vast, unforgiving expanse of the South Atlantic heaves and sighs, a constant reminder of the world's edge. Inside this tiny, swaying room, a figure known as Jeanne Baret hunches over a makeshift desk. By the flickering light of a tallow lamp, their hands, calloused from hauling ropes but nimble from years of delicate work, meticulously press a vibrant, unknown fern between sheets of drying paper. Every vein of the frond, every spore on its underside, is a piece of a puzzle no European has ever seen before. This young man, the personal assistant to the expedition's lead naturalist, Philibert Commerson, is diligent, tireless, and possesses an almost supernatural eye for botanical detail. But Jeanne is a fiction, a necessary, life-threatening lie. The figure is, in fact, Jeanne Baret, a woman from a rural French village with an encyclopedic knowledge of plants, and she is in the process of becoming the first woman to ever circumnavigate the globe. Her very presence on this ship is a capital offense. A 1765 royal ordinance explicitly forbade women from being on French naval vessels, a rule rooted in a cocktail of superstition, misogyny, and the brutal realities of life at sea. Discovery would mean disgrace at best, and at worst, being marooned or imprisoned. So she bound her chest, deepened her voice, and adopted a male persona, sharing her secret only with Commerson, her employer and companion. He was a brilliant but often sickly naturalist, appointed by the Crown to join Louis-Antoine de Bougainville's expedition, France's ambitious answer to British voyages of discovery. Commerson needed a strong, knowledgeable assistant to manage the immense physical labor of collecting, cataloging, and preserving specimens in hostile environments. Jeanne Baret was not just qualified, she was, by all accounts, his intellectual and physical superior in the field. She was the engine of their shared scientific endeavor. She hauled the heavy specimen presses through treacherous jungles, waded through disease-ridden swamps, and negotiated with indigenous peoples for access to plants, all while performing the exhaustive daily charade of being a man among hundreds of sailors. This journey was no mere adventure, it was a mission of empire. Every new plant was a potential source of medicine, food, or economic power for the French crown. The stakes were immense, and the pressure to produce results was constant. On the shores of Brazil, in the dense forests of Patagonia, and across the islands of the South Pacific, it was Baret who did the lion's share of the fieldwork. Commerson's journals, while self-aggrandizing, hint at this reality. He praises his assistant's resilience, calling him his beast of burden, a backhanded compliment that reveals just how much he relied on her strength. He documents her tireless work ethic, her ability to spot unique species from a distance, her deep understanding of botany that went far beyond simple collection. She was not a passive helper, she was an active driving force of discovery. Together, they were amassing one of the most significant botanical collections in history, a trove that would fundamentally reshape European understanding of global biodiversity. But a shadow loomed over every specimen she collected, every note she took. The system she was operating within, a world of royal patronage, patriarchal scientific academies, and rigid social hierarchies, had no category for a woman like her. It had no mechanism to acknowledge her genius, only to exploit her labor. As they sailed onward, laden with thousands of her discoveries, the question was not her contribution would be overlooked, but how completely it would be buried. How could a feat of such audacious courage, physical endurance, and profound scientific insight be so systematically and utterly erased from the historical record? Following her perilous journey, the erasure was not a single dramatic act of theft, but a slow, systemic strangulation of credit, codified in ink and institutionalized by silence. The answer to how her legacy vanished lies here in the quiet, climate-controlled archives of the French National Museum of Natural History in Paris. If you pull the files from the Bougainville expedition, you will find hundreds of herbarium sheets, their centuries-old paper still bearing the exotic flora of the Pacific. On them, in Commerson's elegant script, are the Latin names, the locations, and the dates of collection. But one name is conspicuously absent: Jeanne Baret. Her hand, her eye, her labor are the invisible foundation upon which this entire collection was built, yet she is rendered a ghost in her own life's work. The sheer volume of the collection is staggering. Modern estimates suggest that Baret and Commerson together collected over 6,000 new species, a number that would be a crowning achievement for a dozen naturalists, let alone two. Given Commerson's frequent and debilitating illnesses, it is a mathematical and physical near impossibility that he could have accomplished this alone. Jeanne Baret was not just his assistant, she was the project's primary field researcher. Consider the most famous of these discoveries, the vibrant, cascading flowering vine that now adorns gardens worldwide, the bougainvillea. It was collected in Brazil, a stunning specimen of magenta bracts. It was named in honor of the expedition's commander, Louis-Antoine de Bougainville, a man who likely never touched the plant. The name was a savvy political move by Commerson to curry favor with his patron. The person who almost certainly scrambled through the Brazilian jungle to find and collect it, Jeanne Baret, received no such honor. Her contribution was not merely omitted, it was actively overwritten by the names of powerful men. This was the unchallenged currency of 18th century science. Discovery was an act of naming, and naming was an exercise of power, a power women were legally and socially denied. The systemic bias wasn't theoretical, it was the law. Under French civil code, a woman had little legal identity separate from her father or husband. She could not sign contracts, enroll in a university, or join a scientific academy. Any work she produced, any discovery she made, was legally the property of her male guardian or employer. Commerson didn't just steal her credit, in the eyes of the law, it was already his. The situation imploded in Tahiti in 1768. The local islanders, unaccustomed to European gender norms, immediately recognized her as a woman. The secret was out. The ship's log, kept by Bougainville himself, records the event with a mixture of shock and disdain. She was no longer Jane, the capable botanist, but Jane, the scandalous woman who had broken the law and defied the natural order. This moment of discovery sealed her fate. It weaponized her gender against her, transforming her from an invaluable scientific partner into a liability and a curiosity. From that point on, any claim she might have had to her work was nullified by her transgression. Court transcripts and private letters from the period confirmed this rigid worldview. The scientific establishment, from the Royal Academy of Sciences in Paris to local botanical societies, was an exclusive men's club. The very idea of a woman conducting rigorous fieldwork, of a woman possessing the intellectual and physical fortitude for global exploration, was considered absurd, even offensive. Her work was automatically recategorized as menial assistance, while the genius of discovery was reserved for the man who supervised her. The system didn't just fail to see her, it was designed to be blind to her. What then was the true, immeasurable cost of this stolen legacy, not just for the one woman who risked everything, but for the integrity of science itself? The cost was a distorted history, a gaping hole in the chronicle of scientific achievement where a woman's name should have been. For 2 centuries, that loss was an unwritten chapter, and Jeanne Baret remained a footnote at best, a scandalous curiosity at worst, in the grand narrative of Commerson and Bougainville. Her story was a ghost story, whispered in the margins of history. But ghosts, as we know, have a way of making their presence known. The slow, meticulous reckoning began in the late 20th century, fueled by a new generation of feminist scholars and tenacious historians who refused to accept the official record at face value. They began to ask the questions the establishment had ignored. Who truly did the work? Whose labor is hidden in the passive voice of scientific papers? Researchers like British biographer Glenys Ridley in her seminal work, The Discovery of Jeanne Baret, and historian John Dunmore began a forensic investigation. They returned to the primary sources, not just Commerson's published works, but his private journals, the ship's logs, and the botanical specimens themselves. There, they found the tantalizing clues, the breadcrumbs Baret had left behind. They found Commerson's own contradictory descriptions of his assistant, praising her botanical knowledge in one breath while dismissing her as a mere beast of burden in the next. This very contradiction was evidence. It revealed the internal conflict of a man who knew his dependency on a person whose identity he had to conceal. They cross-referenced the ship's log of locations with the collection dates on the herbarium sheets, revealing an astonishing volume of work performed on days when Commerson was documented as being too ill to leave his cabin. The conclusion was inescapable. Someone else was out in the field, doing the exhaustive work of collection, and that someone was Jeanne Baret. The evidence was not in a single signed document, but in the overwhelming weight of her absence, an absence so profound it could only be explained by a deliberate and systematic erasure. This academic rediscovery has slowly begun to translate into institutional correction. Modern scientific bodies, armed with this new historical context, are re-examining the record. The International Plant Names Index, the global authority on botanical nomenclature, is a living document, and historians and botanists are now working to amend its entries where evidence points to Baret. The most concrete victory came in 2012. Botanist Eric Tepe, studying a new species of nightshade from South America related to the potato and tomato, decided to name it in her honor. And so, more than 240 years after her journey, Baret officially entered the scientific lexicon. It was more than a symbolic gesture. It was a permanent scientific correction, embedding her name into the Linnaean system, the very language of the field she dedicated her life to. Her legacy is finally being restored, one species at a time. Jeanne Baret's story is not, in the end, just about one woman's incredible journey. It is a powerful, undeniable testament to the countless hidden figures, the women, the indigenous collaborators, the marginalized thinkers, whose genius shaped our world, while history, by design, looked the other way. Her restored legacy forces us to confront an unsettling but vital question. How many more discoveries, how many more names still lie buried in the archives, awaiting their rightful place in the annals of science?